Geographers, let's get you back, just briefly. As part of the process, we're going to ask you about some decisions you're making today and why you made those decisions. Resources available include then your classmates or your individual story, or where could you get something more concrete? It's like, oh, I'm not quite sure. I want something that I could really get my hands on.
The internet.
Parents might the internet. I think that's a bit abstract.
Probably the text.
Yeah, in the text, what case studies do we have? In California and the migrant story there. Polls in Great Britain, for example. Great waves of migrations. So what's the difference in that case of being quite concrete versus a little bit more abstract, a little bit more difficult to put your hands on the information? The migration voice thread assessment was, I guess its origins were from really thinking about how to use the students themselves as the resource.
We're going to be looking at these questions on the board, or that were on the board.
When they appear.
They will appear soon. And then I'm going to have you choose a migration story. And this is where there's going to be a lot of choice. You can go something more abstract, your own migration story, the migration story of our class, or you can do something more concrete, one of the case studies we examined in the text.
You pick our
There's
own
a lot of
case.
flexibility. You get to choose the migration story. And then we are going to use a voice thread, which I heard you guys have been using in biology, as a way of presenting this. So you're going to, what we're going to focus on today is just thinking about what story you want to use, and then starting to do a little bit of research on that story to make sure you've got the geographical terminology and knowledge to really look at this as geographers, which is what the assignment's going to be.
We began really with focusing distinguishing what was knowledge and what was application of that knowledge and skills. So we started with the building block of making sure that you're comfortable with the vocabulary, the concepts, what it looks like on a map, to try and get as many of the learning styles to really develop that across the class. Then we we modeled it, so we looked at a story and talked about how these things would apply to a particular story. And then from there, we had them make some selections, be it on their own stories, their classmates' stories, their more concrete examples they could find online or in the text.
This project is really authentic in that it asks students to not use something that we've picked out of a textbook or that was just assigned to them, but to really feel a personal involvement in the story that they're telling and how they're using their geographic knowledge. Many students chose stories that they had a personal connection to. Some chose stories from the case studies, from the textbook, but either way, it was a way that students really got to have that choice and then go in depth from there.
Hello, my name is Alexia. My voice thread is on the reasons and impacts of Greek immigration to the United States. Well, I chose my migration story because of my mom's story. My mom is from Greece, and so she talked to me about how she came to the US for college, and this inspired me to look up why other people came and what were the major waves of Greek migration to the US.
So why do people migrate, and what are the impacts of migration? What, with the chart we just looked at, what kind of question would that help answer?
The pull factors that drew Greeks to the US are more generic. The United States was doing much better, having become the leading economic, industrial, and agricultural power, and many Greeks went there hoping to find better job opportunities and a better income. The Greek government actually encouraged their men to find jobs in the US, because the remittances sent back to Greece greatly benefited them. Besides, there was a shortage of money and jobs, so the departure of so many people helped reduce the unemployment rate. Well, really one thing I learned, and that I still remember well, is the terms used to classify migration, like push and pull factors, voluntary and involuntary, like those were things we knew already, but we didn't know they were called that. And so, like today I was telling actually this project to my dad, and I kept on saying those terms, and he was like, oh, but you know this? And I was like, yes, but now I know what it's called too. So I think I'm going to remember those.
Both Kyle and I, the graduate student who was in the class, said, how do we go beyond saying you need to move away from writing descriptively towards analysis? And then what we agreed was we need to give them the framework or prompting questions in order for them to do that. And then perhaps it would later in the process and then later in the year just become more instinctive.
One of the skills we really concentrated on was the skill of analysis. And what was great about this project was by using the VoiceThread and taking away the pressures of writing an essay and the confines that students usually see in that, and instead telling their story, they could really think about analysis in a new and different way.
The challenge that we appeared to set the students seemed to be one that all students felt that they could meet. And these are certainly not my own words, but what continues to surprise me in using these kinds of activities, these kinds of approaches, is that you can have in mind a kind of outcome, or when you're making your rubric, not a single answer, but you can have in mind the assessment's going to probably look at this fairly narrow component, but students, when you give them the opportunity to think creatively and analytically, they can take it in a number of directions.
I think using VoiceThread in a way was a bit difficult because I had problems with it. Sometimes it didn't save. Also, it's hard to get the speaking part right on the first time because you always make mistakes, so you have to record it like 5 or 6 times until you get it.
What surprised me most in the work that students created was how creatively they really thought about this assignment and the places they took it to. Students took this beyond the initial assignment, which was to tell a migration story, either of your personal migration story from a case study in the textbook, and really went deeply. We had students calling their grandparents or other relatives to really talk about their migration stories and then doing research into those. We had students doing the case study from the textbook, but then taking it to new levels through bringing in outside sources and other migration stories to really augment those. So the depth and the just amount of effort that students put into this assignment was really surprising and wonderful.
In terms of the use of VoiceThread or other similar technologies that may be available to people as apps or web-based information, it was an added addition to, it made the project better than just what we hoped they would record their story. And it took it to added a spatial direction, they could annotate maps, etc. I believe that the result of using the technology and linking it to an assessment with which they had a degree of attachment meant that if the technology failed them or there was a difficulty with VoiceThread because of a connectivity issue or any number of reasons, the students didn't say, I'm not going to, it collapsed and I'm not going to record it. They were intent upon taking the work to its completion. So.
Tests are really stressful, so many times you forget the information or you don't know how to phrase it. You may know it and just not know how to get it on paper. But when you have the time to write it, review it, do it at home, I don't know, personally I do much better that way.
I think one of the things we perhaps let them down with, I would change next time a process where they would be certain of how to reference their sources and be very specific on how you would cite statistics and where and what component that would make within the work. I think we got wrapped up very early with the story in terms of the information, and then perhaps realized too far into the process that we should have done work in terms of citations or taken 10 minutes to talk about the images that they could use and copyright and what digital citizenship is linked to it.